Welcome back for Hunter x Hunter Chapter 417 talk. We've finally learned Benjamin's big plan for winning the Succession War, and it is to not win the Succession War. I have to give him credit for thinking outside the box. So, without further ado, let's examine that plan and everything that might go wrong with it, so we have some idea of what to expect from the next 10 hours on board the Black Whale. I'm excited, Ben's excited, it's gonna be a good time all around. The core idea here is to create a succession emergency so that this emergency law can be invoked. The law states that if all the eligible princes are dead or dying, King Nasubi has to name some new heirs to the throne, lest the continuity of the monarchy be jeopardized. The advantage here for Ben is that he doesn't need to finish off his sister Camilla in time to win the war. He can forget about winning the war entirely as long as nobody else wins it either, and Nasubi names his kid as the next king. Benjamin knows that letting the succession war end in failure like this will probably doom the existing Hueguoro dynasty, as Kurapika theorized. But he thinks that's fine, his kid can just start a new and everlasting dynasty under the care and protection of the Ben Beast, that he will become upon his death. This is quite an optimistic scenario the big guy's counting on here. But before we poke any holes in it, we should review all the princes he needs to kill just to get things off the ground. Nasubi had 14 legitimate children. Right now, 3 of them are dead meat in a cruel sarcophagus, 1 is Benjamin himself, and that leaves 10 siblings to kill or incurably poison to make this work. Ben thinks he's killed Saridnik, more on that later, that leaves 9. He thinks he's incurably poisoned Camilla, Tubeppa, and Tyson, more on that later as well, but that leaves 6. This panel finally reveals to us what I've been wondering since chapter 410. Namely the identities of the 4 princes still to go when Ben's thinking things over at the Justice Bureau. They are Hulkenberg, who's being pursued by Balsamico, Zhonglei and Luzurus, who are pursued by Ben's 3rd and 7th units appropriately enough, and Mariam, who is pursued by everyone's favorite spirit detective, Rihan. That still leaves 2 living princes, Fugetsu and Wobble, but Ben's thought process lets us know why they don't even make the list. He basically considers Fugetsu to be dead already, which makes it easy for him to justify killing her and staging it as a suicide. And he thinks that'll be a cinch once he takes over the Justice Bureau, since that's where she's being kept. Now, even if he does secure the building, Fugetsu is more than capable of slipping out of the net that's closed around her. But Ben doesn't know that, so he's counting her as a sure thing. As for Wobble, Ben is pretty sure that Oito's story is true, and that Prince Wobble has no succession rights because she wasn't at the departure ceremony. This boy child was there instead. His plan is to spare everyone if it can be proven that Wobble's not on the Black Whale, but to kill everyone if Wobble is on the Black Whale. That said, Kurapika's already deduced that there's no way to prove that she's not on the boat just by searching the boat and not finding her. She would have to be definitively located somewhere off the boat, and Ben has no means of doing that in 10 hours. And as I've brought up before, there is a chance that Nasubi secretly included the real Wobble in the departure ceremony, and thus made her eligible without Oito's knowledge. So if she is on the boat, she might have succession rights. Both of those things being the case, Ben would realize if he thought about it more carefully, like Kurapika did, that he can't cross Wobble off unless he finds her on the boat somewhere and kills her. Nothing short of that would prove to Nasubi that the emergency law needs to be invoked. Especially if Nasubi did sneak her into the departure ceremony and thus knows that she can win the war. So if Ben knew what we know, he would have to sheepishly put Wobble and Fugetsu back on his list. Neither one of them is a done deal the way he thinks they are. But the comedy of the situation is that the same goes for every single other prince that he's crossed off. The sisters he sprayed with the TSK-17 are definitely on a death timer, but they could concoct a cure. And even though Ben executed a textbook Doom glory kill on his brother Saridnik, he's actually not dead either. All of this progress he thinks he's made disappears when you take a second look. And so, unfortunately for Ben, the only prince who's going to be dead for sure by the end of his special martial law is Ben himself. But let's not be too hard on the guy. He's doing his best. In fact, let's assume for a second that none of this will matter. Ben will succeed in killing or infecting everyone, and the infection will not get cured, so his 3 sisters upstairs really are doomed. At that point, he goes to Nasubi and convinces him that all of the above is true, and nobody's going to survive to win the succession war. Remember how I said I was going to poke holes in the plan? So in this situation, why exactly would Nasubi agree to name Ben's illegitimate child as the new heir? Ben's acting like this would be simple process of elimination, like there's no other candidates and Nasubi wouldn't have a choice, but I think he's forgetting something important. Nasubi had 14 legitimate children. We have no idea how many illegitimate children he's got running around. But however many there are, they've all got better claims than Ben's illegitimate children in this scenario, because they're children of the actual current king. Ben never won the succession war, remember? So how is he going to sell the idea that his kids should cut in line? Nasubi is more likely to name his daughter Morena Prudo than Ben's kid as the emergency successor, unless he happens to know that she's a fake. And the problems don't stop there. Let's assume that Ben does convince or compel Nasubi to go along with his plan. Although personally, I think Nasubi is pretty formidable, and the compulsion idea would hit a formidable snag. But let's ignore that and say he goes along. Ben's kid becomes the legal heir. Ben dies, and the Ben Beast becomes the guardian of the next king. Great. Some hours pass, and the sisters upstairs succumb to the infection, thereby ending the succession war in failure. Now, if we all remember Kurapika's lecture on the subject, we know the risk of the war ending in failure is part of the Nen engine that powers the spirit beasts. These beasts are created and sustained by the Nen that made the war. So when that Nen goes poof because the conditions have been failed, aren't the beasts gonna go poof at the very same time? Why would the Ben Beast be an exception? And if it does go poof, then Ben's dream of a world-conquering dynasty goes poof with it. Now, you might say, this beast has to be an exception to that rule somehow, or else the ability it has wouldn't work. Ben said the point of this power is to replace the succession war and create a new god. But all of that is Ben's idea now that he knows he's dying. I don't think a beast born of the succession war would be designed to outlast or overthrow the succession war. It's a complete contradiction. The whole point of the war is to be repeated indefinitely, so it's not going to undermine itself. I conclude that this beast was meant to function within the paradigm of the war, not outside of it. Here's how I think it's supposed to work. Ben is supposed to win the war properly, father a bunch of legitimate children, and then start the next war when the time is ripe, just like Nasubi did. Then he could die, fuse with his beast, and select one of those children as his favored successor. If all goes according to plan, the child with the Ben Beast becomes the new king, and the process repeats. Which really could allow Ben to become a quasi-eternal protector of Kekin and its line of kings. But to balance out this high potential, it's a beast that mostly comes into play after Ben wins the war on his own, much like Zhonglei's. This intended scenario should maybe make us wonder whether Nasubi's beast has some ability of its own to choose a favorite or otherwise influence the war that his children will fight in. So that's something we have to keep an eye on. But this also just makes way more sense than Ben's idea, in which Nen from the Succession War is somehow going to outlast the permanent cancellation of the Succession War so that his Ben Beast can live forever, despite him intentionally tanking the war. That just doesn't seem plausible, even if all these other obstacles could be overcome first. And I have a feeling Nasubi might tell him so to his face. Hey, your plan flat out won't work. You're gonna have to come up with a new one. In that event, he'll still be committed to dying and becoming the Ben Beast, since he is cursed and poisoned, but he'll need the war to conclude successfully if he wants to keep on existing. So he'll have to choose a sibling to win the war for him. Or maybe the beast will end up choosing. Either way, this could be a late Thursday twist with repercussions for the whole rest of the war. So I'm excited to see how things unfold once Nasubi and Ben sit down for a father-son chat. Alright, now that I've got that prediction out of my system, I think we should back up a little and talk about Ben's attempted murders on Tier 1. First, let's cover the ill-attended slumber party. Now Tebeba has been infected, and she's got a beast that can synthesize drugs, and Kurapika may be headed her way as an available research partner because Ben has decided to recruit him after seeing Danjin. So the idea that Tebeba might create a cure for TSK-17 was not my original thought. I've seen it popping up in my comments for a while now, and I've been kind of skeptical about it, honestly. I just didn't see the scenario coming together. Mostly because I didn't think Ben was going to bother infecting Tebeba. I figured the plan was just to execute her and everyone else because I wasn't thinking about this emergency law concept yet. So none of this was my call, but at this point I pretty much have to come around to the notion because all the pieces have fallen into place. The way things look, this friendly toad is the obvious path to survival for Tebeba and Tyson. And maybe Camilla too. Tebeba probably wouldn't want to hand Cammy the cure, but Cammy's have-nots give her a pretty strong negotiating position, so it's hard to say how things might shake out. And in the meantime, she's also looking for a cure, and could end up bringing Cheadle and Leorio up to Tier 1 in the process. So that'll be a lot of fun as well. Best case scenario, they all team up to survive the chemical weapon, and the three sisters end up closer than ever. I'm only half joking. If anyone's got the good vibes needed for such a heartwarming result, it's Leorio, and he might be in the mix, so anything can happen. Now let's move on to the other attempted murder that we've just witnessed. It's clear that Cyrenik has used his ability to cheat death once again, but it's not clear at all how he's managed it. I don't know if we're going to get to the bottom of this until we get the Cyrenik point of view, but we can at least establish what needs to be explained so that we're ready to absorb the explanation when it comes. So I'll quickly go over how his ability worked last time in Chapter 387, what his ability seems to be doing this time, and what could end up bridging the gap between the one and the other. Here's the nice, simple diagram Tagashi's made for us. Cyrenik closes his eyes and enters Zetsu, and this gives him the 10 seconds in a flash premonition instantly. Subjectively, he watches 10 seconds happen, but no real time passes. And afterwards, he can keep watching the future while time does pass. So he's got a 10-second lead on the world, and he can keep watching like that for as long as he can maintain Zetsu. But let's say he's using this future sight and he sees something happen that he'd quite like to prevent, such as his own violent death. Well, he's just got to open his eyes to subjectively snap back in time by 10 seconds, the same amount that he jumped forward. And then he can change what really happens during that 10-second interval that he's effectively replaying, while everyone else can only see what was projected to happen. They're unable to see what Sari is really doing to change things. Then, 10 seconds after he opened his eyes, this illusion ends and everyone sees reality again. A reality where Cyrenik is alive and there's no bloodstains and so forth. And all of this perfectly describes what happened when Data tried to shoot him. Now consider Ben's visit to room 1004. Here in the previous chapter, Cyrenik already knows what's about to happen, and he tells Salkov the same thing Ben's going to tell him later, which Salkov picks up on. Two weird things about this one. One, I'm pretty sure he must have seen way more than 10 seconds ahead to know what Ben's gonna say after the kill. And two, having opened his eyes and snapped back to this point in time, it's weird that he can be heard by Salkov as he reports this future info. According to our previous understanding, when Sari opens his eyes and snaps back 10 seconds with new information, nobody can see or hear him, so he shouldn't be able to convey future knowledge to anyone else. Next, if we look at how this scene plays out, Ben spends a while gloating over the corpse, and a ton of soldiers end up entering the room while the body's out in the open. For the time being, Salkov has not secured or concealed this corpse at all, and it must be visible to everyone for probably a minute, if not even longer. So granting that this is an illusion, and Sari really has escaped death with his ability, it seems like the illusion is lasting way beyond the time limit we learned about before. And if he's just using his ability consecutively, the illusion should keep changing in really obvious ways. There'd be a body with bullet holes, and then a body with a stomped head but no bullet holes, and so on. That's not gonna work. So he saw too far in the future, he communicated what he saw when Salkov shouldn't have heard him, and his illusion lasted too long. My tentative explanation for all this comes in two parts. Part 1. When Sari opens his eyes, I postulate that he can choose to leave Zetsu if he wants to end the illusion early. This enables him to tell someone else something about the future and actually be perceived. So it explains telling Salkov what would happen and repeating Ben's future words to him. All we have to modify about the diagram is to add "if I stay in Zetsu" right here to make it conditional. Part 2. He's seeing further ahead and keeping the illusion going longer because the 10 seconds we see on this diagram is not a hard-coded part of the ability. Instead, it's a variable, and that variable increased when Sari kept training. He might now see an entire minute in a flash, allowing him to then see a minute into the future for as long as he wants, and then maintain a minute-long illusion after he opens his eyes. And thus we've explained both of the remaining discrepancies. Or, given the rate at which Sari improves, it could be even longer than a minute. Don't quote me on the exact number. The point is that this same ability, with a bigger variable swapped in, explains everything weird about this scene, without us needing to invent new abilities for him. And that makes things nice and elegant. Sari getting that big of a power-up is pretty horrifying, but what can you do? The guy's a monster. We still don't know what the gun was for specifically, but if he's spending all this time in Zetsu, he can't reinforce his attacks with Nen or anything, so maybe they'll just be his weapon of choice for defending himself during parallel time. And we may get a demonstration of that on all these soldiers still in 1004 after Ben has moved on. Frankly, even if I'm dead wrong about how Serenik's magic trick went down, I'm not gonna worry about it. It's a confusing ability, and maybe it's evolved to become even more confusing instead of doing the same thing with bigger numbers, as I suspect. Not a huge deal to me either way. What I am invested in is my pet theory about Hulkenberg shooting Luzurus, so that's what we're talking about next. I've been banging this drum since my Chapter 413 video, and I think the evidence has just kept accumulating since then. In this chapter, Balsamico has been returned to Ben safe and sound, and there's no obvious reason for it. Hulk could have had his followers carry Balsa off wherever. They could have kept him restrained and off the board, and they chose not to. So, let's try and figure out why, and see if the Luzurus swap sheds any light on things. Captain Balsamico was found alone in room 1009, and it was confirmed by interview that it's really him. We have two possible scenarios here. One, Hulkenberg has swapped out of Balsa's body and a new soul has been swapped in, which is now asleep. Or two, one of Hulk's followers was the swapper instead, and Hulkenberg decided to put himself to sleep in Balsa's body, where he's hiding even now. I'm gonna say I have trouble believing in this second scenario, because it's a huge risk to hide yourself in Balsa when Balsa is known to be a compromised agent. Ben could have had him executed to play it safe, and it wouldn't have been a bad idea, considering how little he understands the body-swapping ability. Balsamico himself suggests imprisonment, and in either of these cases, Hulkenberg would have been out of the game. Balsa's death would kill him, since he has no other body to return to. And you can't win the succession war from the inside of a prison cell either. So, unless Hulkenberg was gambling on Ben's laissez-faire attitude, he wouldn't make this play. And honestly, I'm not even sure he could knock himself out if he wanted to, in order to enact this plan, cause he already used sleeping pills in Balsa's body to take back control when Balsa's soul re-entered it. Can this body just keep taking sleeping pills to swap back and forth indefinitely? I don't know, that sounds sketchy. I think if he were stuck in Balsa's body after the shot, he would have just escaped with his followers. And so my assumption here is we're in scenario number 1. Hulk was the swapper, he's out of there, and there's a new soul sleeping in Balsamico. For about 10 different reasons, I believe that new soul is the soul of 7th Prince Luzurus. I won't go over it all again, but you can review my videos on Chapter 413 and Chapter 414 for a thorough breakdown of why Hulk would shoot him, and how weird he started acting as soon as he woke up. As far as I'm aware, nobody was making this call before my 413 video, so if it turns out that I was right and I guessed it first, I'm taking that all the way to the bank. I promise to be a sore winner about this. I'm never gonna shut up about it. So we do have to justify how Hulkenberg managed to be selected as the swapper when he should have had pretty low odds, but I've also come up with a tentative theory about that, which is if there's a body in the swapping group that has multiple souls inside it, that one gets prioritized. I'm not exactly sure what the logic would be here, but it would allow Hulkenberg to manipulate who gets swapped where, and that makes things more fun, so for the time being, I'm going with that. As I see it happening, Hulkenberg swapped into Luzurus, teamed up with Rice, who was really a Hulkenberg supporter in Rice's body, and got himself off Tier 1 along with the rest of his supporters who helped him fire the shot from 1009. Maybe this escape was facilitated by Queen Unma, who might have her own secret staircase. He could have gone through Broccoli's room, but I think Broccoli would have raised an eyebrow at all these Hulk supporters traveling with Luzurus. And we don't hear about Broccoli or his men confessing anything useful when Ben arrests them. For comparison, Onur and his men do cough up information on Zhonglei's movements, so probably not Broccoli's room. The escape might also have been facilitated by Fugetsu, but I've covered that idea in a previous video, and I don't want to belabor the point. Let's focus instead on what's going on with Hulkenberg's target. We learned in 404 that when there's 2 souls in one body, consciousness is swapped when one of the souls falls asleep, but priority is given to the one who activated the body swap. Sumidori helps activate the body swap, so he gets priority over Shikaku. But that body swapper privilege is particular to the self-sacrificial resolve of Hulkenberg and his followers when they use the ability. If you have a situation like our current one with Balsamico, where both Balsa and Luzurus are victims rather than users of the body swap power, neither one of them had this resolve, and so neither one would get priority. That means that if either soul happens to wake up from its sleep, the other one forcibly loses consciousness, and we would see control of the body swapping from one to the other. And now we start to see what Hulkenberg had in mind when he returned Balsamico to Ben. With Rice feeding him info about Luzurus' schedule, Hulk knew that Luzurus was asleep on the couch when he shot him, exactly like Basho thought he was. That means he could predict that Balsa would be in control of his own body after the swap, since Lutherus's soul is asleep. Thus, Balsa passes the interview, and for all he or Benjamin knows, he's fine now. But Hulkenberg, knowing Lutherus's schedule, can also predict when Lutherus's soul is going to wake up, at which point Balsa will be booted from consciousness and Balsuzerus will take control. So with Balsamico assigned to hunt down Hulkenberg, all Hulk has to do is sit tight until Lutherus's wake-up time. Then have a follower approach and say, "Hey Lutherus, I know it's you in there. This is a message from your little brother. Let's meet up and discuss some things, like how I can get you back into your own body, and how you're going to do some things for me in exchange." The benefits to Hulkenberg of forcing Lutherus into this alliance after seemingly handing Balsa back over to Ben are obvious. Now that Balsa is trusted again because he passed the interview, Balsuzerus can sabotage Ben's mission by giving his men bad orders or feeding Ben bad intel. Lutherus can also give Hulkenberg info on the Mafia, so that Hulk can play Lutherus's role convincingly as the benefactor of the Char family. If Lutherus wants back in his own body, he doesn't have much of a choice about going along with it. And the risk to Hulkenberg in all this was pretty minimal. If Ben had executed Balsa, Lutherus's soul would have flown back into his own body and taken control, but he'd be surrounded by Hulk supporters prepared for this scenario, who would immediately restrain and then medicate him. If Balsa were imprisoned, that'd be no great loss either. And since those things didn't happen, he's got his best case scenario. He's got a man inside Ben's private army, he's got Lutherus's Mafia influence at his disposal, and lest we forget, he's escaped his time limit for controlling Balsa, so he can stop scrambling and start laying plans for the long term. If none of this pans out and shooting a sleeping Lutherus was not a brilliant scheme to fool Ben's interview test, I for one will be disappointed. But I think that's enough Lusenberg for one video. So before we wrap up, let me address a couple things nice and quick. First, I got a lot of comments last week suggesting that Camilla should just tell a maid to shoot her, so that she can get revived and fully cured of the TSK-17 in the process. All I can say to this is that Cammy seems desperate for a cure, which suggests to me that her ability just doesn't work like that. Maybe it's like how in Final Fantasy VII, if Tifa gets turned into a frog and then KO'd, you can revive her with a Phoenix down, but she's still gonna be a frog after she's revived. The status effect persists through death and resurrection. You're gonna have to cure it directly with a Maiden's Kiss. I don't know if it still works like that in the remake, I haven't played that one. Anyway, I hope you're as satisfied with that video game analogy as I am. And second, I've seen a fair bit of theory crafting over the Ben Beast already, so I just want to make the quick observation that Guardian Spirit Beasts are not free upgrades. These things drain your aura even when you've only got one of them. And we've already seen princes like Cammy and Serednik cutting their beasts off from the aura buffet because they'd rather focus on using their own abilities instead. As Bill told us right out the gate, Parasitic Nen actually works better when the host is not a Nen user, because then the beast can use all the aura it wants. All of this is to say that if Ben avoids getting tagged with a Beyond Curse and he does become the Ben Beast of his dreams, and then that Ben Beast selects Serednik in a shocking twist, so now Serednik has two beasts and his parallel future. Oh my goodness, he's unstoppable now. What a huge power-up. If this is the hype train people are on by the time this video gets posted, I just want to push back on that a little bit and say it probably wouldn't be much of a power-up at all. The Ben Beast would be amazing for one of Ben's children. It would probably be not that helpful for one of the princes in the war who already have a Spirit Beast, since they'd just end up with two beasts fighting over one aura supply. And it would be least helpful of all to a prince with a beast who's also a proficient Nen user, because at that point, you'd be splitting your aura 3 different ways. You can ask Castro what happens when you lose focus and try to do too many things at once. Or to be slightly more precise, I guess you'd have to ask Hisoka. So before you post that thread about Serednik with Bohemian Rhapsody versus post-Rose Meruem, just give a moment's thought to good old Castro. That's all I ask. And with that gentle word of admonishment spoken, I am all done for the week. It's going to be 2 weeks before Chapter 418. I think there's just going to be an off week for the magazine. So I plan to fill the gap with a little video about Big Ben. He's the man of the hour after all. So hit me with all your questions, comments, and opinions about the first prince. I do have some structured analysis already in mind, but I think I can make room in there to try and address how you all are feeling about the guy. So let me know down below. Thanks for watching. I'm not sure if Tyson's guards were infected, so the alien guy may or may not be okay, and I'll see you next time.